The Ronin's geta clattered against the cobbled streets of the sleeping village, each step echoing hollowly through the mist-laden air, as though the stones themselves mourned his solitude. The night was still, the moon a pale smudge behind gauzy clouds, casting shadows that clung to the wooden eaves like ghosts of the past. His empty tea bowl, tucked loosely in his sash, weighed heavier than his sword, a void where once there had been ceremony, where steam had curled like incense offerings to the gods, where the first bitter sip had been a sacrament. The memory of it haunted him. The clean scent of tatami, fresh and slightly sweet. The way the bamboo whisk had whispered against the chowan, the taut silence before the first pour, a silence he had once filled with purpose. Now his hands, calloused and steady in battle, trembled faintly as he brushed his thumb over the bowl's rim, smooth as a blade's edge. He could still hear his lord's voice, murmuring the old adage ikigo iki, one meeting, one moment, but the words dissolved like steam into the chill wind. The village was empty, yet every shuttered window seemed to watch him. Every breath of wind carried the phantom rustle of banners bearing his fallen clan's crest. He paused, shoulders tensing, as if expecting an arrow not from an enemy, but from the past itself. The air smelled of damp earth and distant pine, of hearths long gone cold. He exhaled slowly, willing his breath to match the rhythm of the river beyond the streets, its endless flow a mockery of his stagnation. Somewhere a branch snapped too sharp, too deliberate. His fingers twitched toward his sword, but he forced them still. No enemy lurked here but himself. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, he was back in the tea room, the mat's weave imprinting his knees, the steam rising in curls like the souls of the dead. The bitterness of matcha lingered on his tongue, a sacrament sharper than blood. When he opened his eyes, the village remained, silent and indifferent. The moon slipped free of the clouds, splashing silver across his path. He adjusted the bowl in his sash, the motion practiced, reverent. It was empty, yet it held everything. The weight of spilled tea, of spilled loyalty, of a life poured out and never refilled. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest hint of wood smoke, perhaps from a waking kitchen, perhaps from pyres long extinguished. He walked on, his shadow stretching ahead like a bridge between who he had been and who he might yet become. The evening air carried the crisp scent of pine and distant rain as the Ronin stood before the teahouse, his cracked geta clattering softly against the worn cobblestones. The faint, grassy aroma of freshly whisked matcha curled through the wooden slats of the entrance, mingling with the musty sweetness of tatami, clean, yet steeped in memory. Like the halls of his lord's fortress, long reduced to ashes, his hand, calloused and restless, hovered near the tsuka of his katana, though no threat lingered here. It was an old habit, a reflex honed in a life where even silence could slit a man's throat. The breeze shifted, lifting the frayed edges of his tattered hayori, and for a breath he was back there. The screaming of arrows, the copper stench of blood, the way the cherry blossoms had fallen like snow over the dead. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, forcing the images to scatter. The teahouse doorway loomed, its bamboo curtain swaying as if beckoning, yet his feet refused to move. What right had he a blade without a sheath, a man without a master to step into that sanctuary of order and grace? The tea bowl at his hip, chipped and empty, seemed to grow heavier, a silent rebuke. Once he had knelt in sunlit chambers, the porcelain warm beneath his palms, the ritual's precision a mirror to his discipline. Now, the mere thought of lifting it made his fingers tremble, but the matcha's fragrance wrapped around him again, insistent, and beneath the bitterness, he caught the ghost of something pure, untouched by war. The wind sighed through the pines, a branch creaked like an old floorboard. Somewhere inside, a kettle hissed, and the murmurs of patrons wove a fragile harmony. He dared to lift the curtain. The dim interior greeted him low beams, the soft gleam of lacquered wood, a single shaft of light cutting through the haze of steam where an old woman knelt before an iron pot. Her hands moved with the certainty of tides, each motion a covenant with the unseen. For the first time in years, his spine straightened, as if the scent alone had summoned the ghost of his posture. The past whispered, but here, in the quiet mastery of the ceremony, lay a different kind of discipline. Not the edge of a sword, but the curve of a bowl, not the strike of a rival, but the stillness between breaths. He stepped forward, and the curtain fell behind him like a blade sheathed at last. The rain had softened to a whisper by the time the Ronin reached the teahouse, its wooden eaves sagging with the weight of years, the lanterns casting trembling pools of light on the damp cobblestones. His geta clattered unevenly, the sound hollow against the stillness of the evening, and the frayed hem of his kimono clung to his ankles, sodden with the road's grime. He hesitated at the threshold, his fingers brushing the chipped rim of the empty tea bowl at his belt, a relic of a life where his hands had known the weight of a master's cup, not the hollowness of a wanderer's begging. The scent of fresh tatami and steamed rice seeped through the shoji, clean and unbearably familiar. And for a breath, he was back in his lord's hall, the murmur of the clan's voices around him, the ritual of the evening tea about to begin. But the memory splintered like rotten wood. Voices became screams. The scent of tea gave way to smoke, and the warmth of the hall bled into the chilling grip of the night. His lord fell. His jaw tightened, his sword hand twitched, craving the reassurance of the hilt. But then the door slid open with a whisper of aged wood. An old woman stood there, her face a map of gentle lines, eyes sharp as a hawk's, yet softened with something he had not seen in years. Recognition, not of his name, but of the storm inside him. "The rain will seep into your bones if you linger," she said, stepping aside. Her wrinkled fingers, steady as temple bells, gestured inward, and the warmth of the hearth spilled out, carrying the earthy fragrance of matcha whisked to foam. The Ronin exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the air between them. Every instinct warned him to turn away. Men like him brought ruin to quiet places, but the weight of his solitude pressed harder than pride. He bowed, just shallowly enough to veil his shame, and crossed into the light. The tatami sighed under his feet, releasing the ghost of summer grass as he knelt, the frayed ends of his sash pooling around him. She moved like water, her steps sure despite the curve of her spine. And when she laid out the tea implements, the chowin's glaze catching the firelight. The bamboo scoop resting like a bridge between worlds, his chest ached. This was the order he had forsaken. The old woman said nothing as she poured, her wrists turning with the precision of a priestess at an altar, and the steam curled upward, a fleeting incarnation of the prayers he'd long abandoned. The first bitter sip flooded his tongue, and suddenly he was a boy again, kneeling beside his father, the heat of the bowl searing his palms as he learned that tea was more than drink. It was stillness. It was grace. His throat burned. Outside, the wind stirred the eaves, and for a heartbeat, the lanterns flickered, casting shadows that danced like the banners of his fallen clan. The old woman's gaze lingered on the trembling of his hands, not from age, but from the weight of holding a sword too long, a life too heavy. Some storms, she murmured, refilling his bowl, are meant to be weathered in company. The matcha's froth swirled, green as the hills of his homeland, and in its stillness he glimpsed neither samurai nor Ronin, but simply a man breathing. The sword at his side was no longer a chain, but a shadow, one of many. The bowl in his hands was no longer empty. The Ronin hesitated at the threshold, his worn geta whispering against the smooth wooden step. The scent of fresh tatami and faint incense curling around him like a half-remembered dream. The tearoom was spare, perfect in its stillness, sunlight filtering through shoji paper in soft, geometric patterns, the air cool against his calloused hands. The tea mistress knelt at the low table, her movements fluid as a river's bend, sleeves rustling like wind through bamboo. She said nothing as her eyes flicked to the empty bowl at his hip, its lacquered surface dulled by years of restless travel. His fingers twitched toward it, an old shame prickling his neck. That hollow vessel, once cradled in ceremony, now as purposeless as he. She gestured to the cushion before her, and he knelt, the sword of heaven's weight, as his old sensei had named it, pressing against his thigh, both burden and anchor. The silence between them was taut, threaded with the quiet sounds of her preparation, the hiss of boiling water in the iron kettle, the faint scrape of the chasen against ceramic, the rustle of silk as she measured powdered tea with the precision of a star navigator. He inhaled sharply the green scent of matcha, bitter and bright like the first breath after battle. And suddenly, he was back in his lord's hall, kneeling beside brothers whose names now lived only in the kami's memory. His jaw tightened. The mistress paused, her ladle hovering mid-pour, sensing the tremor in his breath. Time slowed. The steam rose in delicate spirals, coalescing, vanishing like the smoke of his clan's pyres on that final autumn evening. He recalled the weight of his lord's seal in his palm, the cold press of it against his skin, as he swore an oath now reduced to whispers in the wind. The tea bowl before him, her bowl, glazed the blue of twilight, winked in the light as she filled it, the liquid's surface catching the sun like a still pond. His hands, hardened by strife, ached to cradle warmth again. She rotated the bowl once, an offering, a test. The ceramic met his palms, smooth as a sword's tang polished by 10,000 draws. For a heartbeat, he feared his grip would falter, that the cracks in him would split wide and spill something unnameable into this sacred space. But then the first bitter sip flooded his tongue, and the world narrowed to this. Shadows lengthening across the tatami, the distant cry of a hawk circling high above the pines, the weight of the sword still sheathed breathing against his side. The tea mistress smiled faintly, her own bowl raised in silent communion, and for the first time in years, the Ronin felt the ghost of his honor stir, not as a specter of the past, but as something alive, trembling like steam on the verge of dissolution. Here, in the space between breaths, between sips, between the clatter of swords and the rustle of silk, he was whole. The Ronin watched her hands, weathered yet precise, as they moved through the air like whispered secrets. The scent of fresh tatami, straw-woven and clean, mingled with the vegetal sharpness of powdered tea, a fragrance that tugged at the edges of his memory, long halls of a distant castle, the murmur of retainers, the scent of ink on parchment. The tea bowl she lifted was unadorned, its glaze the deep brown of autumn earth. And as her fingers cradled it, he felt the ghost of his own bowl's weight in his palms, lost long ago with his name, his clan. Her sleeves rustled like leaves in a quiet wind, the silk brushing the low wooden table where sunlight pooled in a slow, golden puddle. It was a sound that belonged to a world of order, of measured breaths and unbroken lineage, everything he had once known, and everything he had failed to protect. Her wrist turned, a motion as fluid as a swordsman's draw, and he heard, or perhaps imagined, the faint metallic whisper of a blade leaving its saya. The way his own katana had sung on that final night, steel flashing beneath a blood-red moon. The air between them was thick with silence, broken only by the soft hiss of water poured just shy of boiling, the steam curling like incense toward the ceiling. He inhaled, and for the first time in years, his breath matched the rhythm of another's, unhurried, deliberate. The tea's bitterness bloomed on his tongue as she served him, a taste that mirrored the ache in his chest, sharp, clarifying. Was this what remained of honor? Not the battlefield's roar, but this, the curve of a bowl, the stillness of a room, the way her fingertips barely trembled as she wiped away a single stray drop with a cloth as white as unmarked snow. Outside, the wind stirred the cherry trees. Petals fell in languid spirals, tracing the same path as the ashes of his lord's pyre. For a moment, the past was not a wound but a shadow, and he was not a Ronin, but a man here now, the heat of the cup seeping into his calloused hands, the weight of the sword at his side no heavier than the weight of his own breath. The tea ceremony was a small thing, a fragile vessel holding time itself. And yet, as the bowl emptied, he understood. This too was a kind of battle, to be present, to endure, to find in the space between movements the shape of something unbroken, the faint scent of fresh tatami and steamed rice curled through the dimly lit tea house as the elderly owner knelt across from the Ronin, her gnarled hands steadying the kettle's pour. Steam rose in lazy tendrils between them, carrying the earthy bitterness of matcha, a fragrance that stirred memories of his clan's morning rituals, the murmured prayers before battle, the way his lord's laughter would soften the crisp autumn air. He exhaled slowly, anchoring himself in the warmth of the bowl between his palms, its smooth lacquer cool against his calloused fingers. The owner's voice, like wind through bamboo, broke the silence. "This bowl once belonged to my husband," she said, tracing its chipped rim with a fingertip. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones echoed like distant drums, a sound that once heralded his battalion's march. Now it was only noise. She spoke of famine winters, of burying children beneath plum trees that bloomed too brightly each spring, of weaving torn kimono into ropes to haul water from wells gone brackish. Her words pooled in the space between them, thick as the tea's froth. The Ronin's grip tightened imperceptibly. His sword lay beside him, its saya whispering against the floorboards as if restless. He remembered the last harvest moon before his clan's fall song and sake. The way firelight had glinted off his brother's armor like a field of stars. The owner lifted the kettle again, her sleeve brushing a cherrywood table worn smooth by generations of elbows and grief. A tremor passed through her wrist, a flicker of weakness she masked by turning toward the Aurori's embers. "We rebuild," she murmured, "not because we forget, but because the gods waste no effort. Even cracked bowls hold tea." The Ronin watched a maple leaf drift through the open shoji, its edges singed gold by the setting sun. For the first time in years, he did not flinch at the lightness in his chest. The leaf settled on the tatami between them, a fragile bridge across time. He drank, and the bitter green taste was no longer a reminder of absence, but of earth, of roots, of something that, like the old woman's hands, endured. The morning mist clung to the Ronin's sleeves as he knelt in the dimly lit tea room, the scent of fresh tatami mingling with the crisp, earthy bitterness of matcha. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of battle, hovered over the tea bowl, a simple, unchipped vessel, its emptiness a mirror to his own unraveled life. The scent of charcoal from the hearth traced the air, thin and clean, and somewhere beyond the paper-thin walls, a lone cicada hummed, its drone fading into the stillness. He inhaled slowly, letting the ritual overtake him, the soft scrape of the bamboo whisk against ceramic, the warmth of the bowl seeping into his palms, the way the steam curled upward like the ghosts of his fallen comrades, whispering in the spaces between breath. Once, this ceremony had been performed in the halls of his lord's castle, surrounded by the rustle of silk and the murmurs of courtiers. Now, there was only silence, save for the distant clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones, a sound that tugged at his chest like the memory of laughter, long extinguished. The woman's voice, when she spoke, was gentle but unyielding, a stream cutting through stone. In the act of preparing tea, the mind must become still as the moon's reflection on undisturbed water. His fingers tensed, the water trembled. He thought of his sword, resting against the wall, its edge sharp enough to split a falling leaf. How different this dance of patience was from the lightning arcs of battle, where clarity came only in the space between life and death. Yet here in the quiet, the weight of his past pressed upon him. The screams of his clan, the metallic reek of blood on rain-soaked earth, the way his lord had fallen without a sound. His breath caught. The woman lifted the bowl, her movements precise as a crane's steps, and for a fleeting moment, he glimpsed something beyond the void, the way the light pooled in the tea's jade depths, like sunlight piercing a forest canopy, or the first flicker of dawn after a night of endless watch. It was not forgiveness nor redemption, but something simpler. The act of being utterly present as the earth was present beneath him, as the stream outside flowed without hesitation. He exhaled. The bitterness on his tongue was sharp, alive, and for the first time in years, he did not flinch from it. The ceremony was not an escape, she had said, but a return to oneself, to the world. The Ronin closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his lids, he saw not the faces of the dead, but the space between the stars, vast and silent and waiting. The Ronin knelt in the dim stillness, his knees pressing into the taut weave of the tatami, its faint scent of fresh straw and aged wood mingling with the sharp, clean aroma of matcha. The tea bowl before him cracked, empty. A relic of a life long shattered sat between his calloused hands like an unanswered question. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, a sound so soft it might have been the ghosts of his clan murmuring in the shadows. He closed his eyes, but the memories crowded in. The clash of steel, the desperate cries of men whose names he could still recite, the acrid smoke curling from the ruins of his lord's hall. His fingers tightened around the bowl's rim, the smooth glaze cool against his skin. Yet it offered no comfort, only the weight of failure. The scrape of a katana being drawn would have been imperceptible to most, but his body tensed instinctively, his breath hitching for a fraction of a second before he forced it to steady. He was not in battle now. There was no enemy here but himself. Across the room, the tea master moved with deliberate grace, the rustle of silk against silk echoing like fallen leaves. The Ronin watched the dance of light on the wooden tray as water was poured. the liquid's gentle slosh, a counterpoint to the occasional distant clatter of geta against cobblestone's ordinary life. Unconcerned with his sorrow, his own heartbeat was louder in his ears. Once, he had known stillness, not this hollow silence gnawing at his ribs, but the quiet certainty of a life bound by duty. Now, every breath felt stolen, every step taken without purpose. The tea master's hands didn't tremble as they lifted the whisk, but the Ronin's might have, had he dared to reach for it. Instead, he traced the empty bowl's fissures, the cracks like scars, and wondered if he, too, could be remade into something whole. The first sip of tea was bitter, flooding his mouth with the taste of earth and sky, of rituals older than empires. Heat seeped into his palms, grounding him. For a moment, just a moment, the noise of the past dulled. The steam rose in delicate tendrils, carrying with it the faintest hint of cherry blossoms, a memory of springs long gone, of his mother's hands guiding his own in a ceremony he once thought trivial. Now, he understood, this was not surrender, but alignment. The way the tea settled in the cup mirrored the way his spine straightened, as though the gods themselves had pressed a finger between his shoulders and whispered, "Enough." Outside, dusk painted the sky in muted golds, the air thick with the damp promise of rain. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world carried on, merchants haggled, children laughed, rivers flowed unburdened toward the sea. The bowl was empty again too soon. But this time, when his fingers curled around it, they did not shake. The shopkeeper's fingers, wrinkled like old parchment, extended the tea bowl toward the Ronin with a reverence reserved for sacred objects. The bowl's curve caught the dim light of the shop, its glaze a quiet storm of earthy greens and muted browns, like the forest floor after rain. As the Ronin received it, his calloused hands, once swift with the certainty of a blade, now stiff from disuse, trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. The clay was cool, smoother than silk beneath his fingertips, and he cradled it as he might have cradled the face of a fallen comrade, afraid his grip would either shatter it or betray the ghosts that followed him. The scent of fresh tatami and drying tea leaves filled the air, clean and simple, a fleeting antidote to the iron and smoke stench of battlefield nights that still clung to his dreams. He exhaled, adjusting his grip, and the bowl's rim gleamed like the edge of a distant moon, a reminder of the celestial order he had once served, now broken. The shopkeeper murmured something about the bowl's maker, a master potter who had died in the same uprising that had shattered the Ronin's clan, and the coincidence struck him like a dull blade to the ribs. He traced a hairline crack near the base, barely visible, a flaw born of the kiln's fire, and wondered if the artisan, too, had once mourned the imperfection of his life's work. The rhythm of his breath slowed, matching the quiet drip of water from the eaves outside, and for a moment, the clamor of his thoughts stilled. The bowl was a vessel, yes, but also a mirror. Had he not once been molded by duty, glazed with honor, only to emerge from war's fire cracked and hollow. Outside, the muffled clatter of geta on stone punctuated the silence. A passing traveler oblivious to the quiet reckoning within. The Ronin's thumb brushed the bowl's inner curve, imagining the tea it would hold liquid jade, swirling with the same serenity his old master had sought in ceremony, an attempt to trap tranquility in motion. He had scorned such rituals in his youth, too eager for the clarity of combat, where purpose was as sharp as steel. Now, the thought of lifting this bowl to his lips, of feeling warmth seep into his palms, carried an almost unbearable longing. It was not just tea he desired, but the stillness before the first sip, the moment when the world reduced to steam rising in silence, and a man could taste the fleeting illusion of being whole. The shopkeeper's voice, soft as worn cotton, broke his reverie. Handle it gently. It remembers the hands that shaped it. The Ronin nearly laughed how like the gods, to defend the clay but not the flesh. Yet as he lowered the bowl, his fingers steadied, finding purchase in its weight. Perhaps, like him, it was not fragile, but simply waiting. The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of coming rain, and he felt the ghost of an old resolve settle in his chest. If the bowl could endure, so could he. If it could hold warmth, so could his hands. And if it bore the marks of its making, then so be its scars were the price of being shaped by fire. She pours the tea, the steam rising like the ghosts of his past. The scent of freshly whisked matcha, bitter and green, mingles with the clean, sun-warmed straw of the tatami beneath him, a fragrance that stirs memories of his lord's morning rituals, of times when his hands held purpose beyond the grip of a sword. The porcelain bowl, smooth as a river stone, radiates warmth against his calloused palms, its delicate curve, a fragile echo of the armor he once wore. Steam swirls, a ghostly dance, and for a moment he sees them again, the faces of his fallen brothers, their laughter carved into the smoke, their voices lost to the wind that now sighs through the paper-thin walls of the humble tea house. His grip tightens imperceptibly. The tremor in his fingers is not from fatigue, but the weight of remembrance. The woman opposite him moves with effortless grace, sleeves whispering like autumn leaves against polished wood, her every gesture a silent hymn to discipline. He envies her certainty. The tea's surface shivers as a drop falls from the bamboo whisk tiny ripples, like the disturbances his blade once left in the air. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobbled streets ebbs and flows, a tide of ordinary lives untouched by the specters that dog his steps. He inhales, the air thick with the promise of rain and distant hearth smoke, and for the first time in years, he allows himself to pause. The first sip is a revelation, heat and earth, and something unnameable, a bitterness that lingers like regret. But beneath it, a sweetness blooms, slow as dawn. The ghosts recede. The world narrows to this. The bowls wait, the steams curl, the way the light shifts across the mat as the sun slips behind a cloud. Here, in this fragile communion, there is no Ronin, no masterless man, only the tea, the moment, and the quiet unraveling of his coiled despair. The woman does not speak, yet her silence is a kindness. She has given him not just tea, but an anchor. The steam thins, vanishing like the whispers of the dead, and for the first time in longer than he can remember, he breathes without the iron taste of blood on his tongue. The bowl empties, but the hollow in his chest feels, if not filled, then touched by something akin to peace. The gods, if they still listen, must be laughing to find solace not in battle or glory, but in the slow sacrament of a stranger's poured tea. The Ronin's calloused fingers cradled the chowan, its curve familiar yet foreign, like the ghost of a life he could no longer claim. The tea's steam curled upward, vanishing into the crisp morning air, as fleeting as the honor he once bore. He hesitated, the bowl's weight a silent accusation. This was the vessel of masters, of men who still belonged to something. The scent of matcha, earthy and sharp, mingled with the faint musk of aging tatami beneath him, the whisper of a world that had once been his. Around him, the teahouse breathed with quiet life. The distant murmur of water boiling, the rustle of silk as the host adjusted her sleeves, the tap of bamboo against porcelain, precise as a sword stroke. His own breath hitched, trapped between memory and moment. He could still hear the clatter of geta on cobblestones as he wandered these streets, purposeless. The hollow echo of his own footsteps, a mockery of the disciplined marches of his past. The tea's surface trembled, no, his hand did. A memory flashed, his lord's voice, steady as stone. A warrior's resolve is in stillness. But stillness was a luxury for those unburdened by ghosts. The fallen faces of his clan flickered behind his eyelids, their silent stares heavier than armor. He tightened his grip, the bowl's rough glaze biting into his skin, a welcome anchor. Then a breath. The bitterness of the tea flooded his tongue, its heat seeping into his chest like sunlight through fractured ice. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to this. The warmth in his palms, the ritual's unyielding order, the way the light pooled in the chowan's depths, golden as the banners of his lost home. The bitterness lingered, but so did something else, a quiet, like the pause between heartbeats, where the gods themselves might listen. The tea was gone too soon, the bowl empty again. Yet for the first time in years, so was he. The Ronin knelt in the dim, hushed space of the tea house, the scent of fresh tatami and steamed bamboo mats rising around him like a ghost of simpler days. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as they hovered above the empty tea bowl, smooth, cool, unmarred by time, yet heavy with the weight of all it signified. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of wooden geta on cobbled streets echoed like the distant drumbeats of a past life. A life where honor was as tangible as the sword at his side. The sharp, almost imperceptible whisper of steel being drawn flickered through his memory. Not now, not here, but years ago, beneath the cherry blossoms of his lord's estate, where the air hummed with the tension of discipline and the perfume of falling petals, his master's voice returned to him, low and immovable as stone. A warrior's strength lies not in the sword, but in the stillness behind it. The words had been an anchor once. Now they were a thorn. The teacup before him had been filled 1,000 times with pride, with purpose, but today it sat hollow, a mirror of his own spirit. He closed his eyes, letting the bitterness of matcha dissolve on his tongue, its astringency a fleeting echo of the life he had lost. The clan's banners, vivid crimson against the smoke of battle, unfurled in his mind's eye, followed by the silence that came after. The deafening absence of comrades who had fallen with his lord. The afternoon light slanted through the shoji screens, painting the floor with gold, and for a breath, he could almost feel the weight of his master's hand on his shoulder, guiding him through the ritual, each movement precise, each breath a surrender. The steam from the kettle curled like incense, carrying prayers to gods who had long since stopped listening. His sword lay beside him, its scabbard worn with use, its blade a testament to survival, not victory. In the quiet, he reached for the ladle, the wood polished smooth by centuries of hands, just like his hands that had known both blood and beauty. The water poured with a sound like distant rain, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to the cadence of the stream, the warmth of the cup, and the fragile hope that here, in this sacred stillness, he might find the shadow of the man he had once been. The tea house was a sanctuary of quietude, its wooden floors smooth under the Ronin's worn tabi socks, the scent of fresh tatami mats and steamed bamboo mingling with the faint earthiness of powdered matcha. The proprietor, a woman whose hands moved with the precision of a calligrapher's brush, gestured for him to kneel. Her voice, as steady as the trickle of water into the stone basin outside. His breath hitched just slightly as he settled onto the cushion, the rustle of his kimono the only sound in the hushed space. The weight of his katana at his side felt heavier here, an intruder in this realm of peace, yet inseparable from him, like the ghost of his past. Her instructions were soft but deliberate. Purify the bowl. Measure the tea. Stir in silence. Each word was a thread pulling him back to a time when his life was bound by ritual, by the unyielding codes of bushido, when he had knelt just like this, surrounded by brothers in arms whose laughter now lived only in memory. His fingers trembled as he lifted the chowan, its curve fitting imperfectly in his grip. The glaze cracked in places like the fragments of his honor. The steam rose, carrying the bitter green fragrance of the tea, and for a moment he was elsewhere, the battlefield's chaos, the metallic tang of blood, the way the cherry blossoms had rained down like funeral offerings as his clan fell. The woman's quiet inhale brought him back. She poured hot water with the care of one tending a sacred flame, the liquid cascading into the bowl like a mountain stream, clear and purposeful. The act was simple, Yet it demanded presence, no room for the clawing guilt, the restless wandering, the unanswered question of why he alone remained. As he whisked the tea into froth, the rhythmic scrape of bamboo against ceramic echoed the pulse of his heart, slowing, steadying. The first sip was astringent, almost punishing, but beneath it lay a sweetness, fleeting as the peace he sought. The cup warmed his palms, and for the span of that breath, he was not a Ronin, not a relic of war, but a man connected to something older than swords. The quiet communion of hands, bowl, and earth. Outside, the wind stirred the lanterns, their light flickering like distant shrine fires, and he wondered if this fragile moment of order was what the gods had spared him for. The owner's eyes met his, unspoken understanding passing between them. And in that silence, he felt the weight of his blade ease, if only for the duration of the ceremony. The Ronin's hands, once calloused from battle, now moved with unexpected precision as he knelt upon the tatami, its freshly woven reeds releasing a whisper of earth and summer grass beneath him. The scent of matcha, vibrant and bitter, curled through the air like a ghost of his former life, so different from the iron and sweat stench of the battlefield, yet no less familiar. His fingers, still marked by the scars of countless sword grips, trembled faintly as he lifted the chanoyu, its smooth curve cool against his palm, the glaze a deep, unbroken black, like the night sky before the first star appears. Each motion was deliberate, each breath measured. The slow pour of water, the whisk's soft scrape against ceramic, the way his thumb traced the bowl's rim, a ritual not of war, but of patience, of presence. Once these hands had known only the raw urgency of survival, the unforgiving grip of the katana, the slickness of blood on the hilt. Now, they sought stillness, a fleeting harmony between muscle and mind. The clatter of geta on distant cobblestones, the rustle of willow leaves beyond the shoji screens all faded as he let the weight of the empty days slip away. He had wandered too long, a blade without a sheath, a soul without a prayer. But here, in the silence between steam and sip, he could almost hear the voices of his fallen brothers, not as accusations, but as whispers on the wind, urging him to remember that honor was not only in the strike, but in the pause. The tea's bitterness bloomed on his tongue, a welcome ache, like the sting of a long-forgotten wound finally allowed to breathe. For a moment, the bowl was more than clay, it was an offering, a bridge between the man he had been and the man he might yet become. The light shifted, golden and thin as it slid through the window, and in its glow he saw not the Ronin, but the samurai who had once knelt just so, beneath cherry blossoms, in service to something greater than himself. The past was a weight, but the tea was warm, and the ritual, though fleeting, was enough. The Ronin knelt on the sun-warmed tatami, the faint, clean scent of straw weaving with the earthy bitterness of freshly whisked matcha. His hands, calloused yet steady, hovered over the chanoyu, its cracked glaze a silent testament to fractures deeper than ceramic. The teahouse owner sat across from him, an old man with eyes like river-smoothed stones, watching. The Ronin poured, his wrists remembering the precise angle of service, the tilt of the vessel measured, deliberate, as though still performing for a lord long dead. Steam coiled upward, a fragile ghost between them. His breath slowed just as it had a lifetime ago in the training halls, where the scrape of wooden practice swords and the rustle of hakama had been hymns to discipline. Now, the only sound was the liquid's quiet sigh into the cup, the almost imperceptible tremor in his fingers as he halted mid-pour, arrested by memory. His clan's banner snapping in the wind, the metallic tang of blood on his tongue as he kneeled among the fallen. The present rushed back the clatter of geta on cobbled streets outside, the muffled laughter of merchants alien, indifferent. His thumb traced the chowin's rim, cool as the hilt of his katana at dawn. This bowl, empty so often, now brimmed with something akin to absolution. The tea's surface mirrored the dimming sky, a fleeting planet of amber light. To serve again, even this small act was to grasp at the edges of a self he'd thought severed. The owner nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of grace amid ruin. And for a heartbeat, the Ronin was not a wanderer, but a man suspended between tides, the bitter dregs of loss and the faint, honeyed aftertaste of peace. The moment stretched, a fragile eternity suspended between them, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. The Ronin knelt on the woven tatami, its fresh, grassy scent mingling with the steam rising from the iron kettle, a whisper of warmth in the cool, still air. His calloused fingers hovered over the empty tea bowl, its smooth glaze cold against his skin, a hollow echo of the life he once knew. Outside, the wind brushed through the bamboo grove, a delicate rustle like the sigh of ghosts, and for a heartbeat, he could almost hear the voices of his fallen clan laughter around a fire, the scrape of practiced swords, his lord's final command before the battle that shattered everything. The room was dim, the shifting light through the shoji panels painting trembling shadows on the floor, and in that faint glow, his katana lay beside him, its edge catching the pale gleam like a sliver of forgotten moonlight. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, feeling the tremor in his breath as it unraveled into silence. The tea master across from him moved with the precision of a ritual, her sleeves whispering against the low wooden tray, the porcelain chowin cradled in her palms as if it held the world. When she poured, the water's soft trickle was the only sound, a fleeting bridge between past and present. His throat tightened. How many times had he sat like this, in the orderly embrace of ceremony, before war reduced him to this rootless wandering? The bitterness of matcha lingered on his tongue, sharp and cleansing, a taste that carried the weight of discipline, of mornings spent in meditation before donning armor now stripped of insignia. Her hands paused, the barest hesitation, and his gaze flickered to the scar across her wrist, a mirror to his own. No words passed between them, yet he felt the question in her stillness. Who do you serve now? The wind stilled. Somewhere beyond the walls, a temple bell tolled, its deep resonance humming through the earth. Through him, a reminder of impermanence, of cycles deeper than duty or shame. The rim of the bowl pressed into his palm, solid and real, and for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Here, in this quiet space where steam curled like incense toward the gods, where every movement was both prayer and art, he remembered what it was to belong not to a lord or a name, but to the moment itself. The clatter of geta on distant cobblestones faded. The restless itch to move dissolved like tea leaves settling in clear water. His fingers steadied. The light shifted, and in the silence between heartbeats, the Ronin bowed, not in surrender, but in recognition. The Ronin knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, the clean scent of straw and fresh matcha curling around him like a ghost of his former life. His calloused fingers traced the smooth, lacquered curve of his empty tea bowl, once a vessel for shared ceremony. Now a hollow reminder of the oath he could no longer keep. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobbled streets echoed like distant taiko drums. But here, in the dim quiet of the tea house, even the whisper of his breathing seemed deafening. He hesitated before lifting the chasen, its bamboo tines trembling faintly, not from weakness, but from the memory of another hand guiding his own, his master's voice murmuring of harmony as cherry blossoms brushed the courtyard beyond. The past pressed in, the metallic tang of blood on winter air, the choked silence of his fallen brothers, the weight of his katana still sharp enough to sever a falling leaf, yet powerless to cut away his shame. But then the kettle sighed. Steam rose in a curling prayer, and as he poured, the water's song was the sound of a bridge forming between what was and what remained. His shoulders eased, unbending like a willow after storm. The first bitter sip bloomed across his tongue, and for a heartbeat, the bowl was full again, not with tea, but with the stillness of dawn over a mist-cloaked dojo, the rustle of disciples' hakama, the unspoken reverence of a shared moment untouched by time. The ghosts did not vanish, but they softened, blurred at the edges like ink in rain. Here, in the act of measuring, whisking, holding the bowl just so, he found not absolution, but a fragile truce. The blade at his waist was still a burden, yet the warmth seeping into his palms reminded him. Even a cracked cup could hold something sacred. The light shifted, gilding the steam, and his next breath came without the iron grip of memory. It was enough, for now it was enough. The tea house owner bowed slightly, her hands folded in silent greeting. And as the Ronin knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami, he caught the faint, comforting scent of straw mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly whisked matcha. The air itself seemed to hold its breath still, reverent as if the gods had paused to watch. His calloused fingers, still marked by the memory of 1,000 battles, trembled ever so slightly as they brushed the smooth, lacquered rim of the empty bowl before him. Its emptiness a reminder of all that had been spilled, all that could never be reclaimed. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobbled streets echoed like distant drums, a world rushing onward, while he remained suspended in this quiet space, caught between the weight of the past and the fleeting promise of peace. The owner's quiet smile did not go unnoticed, a knowing curve of lips, as if she had glimpsed the storm within him and recognized the moment it began to still. For years, the ghost of his clan had walked beside him, their whispers in the wind, their faces flickering in the flame of every campfire. The sword at his side, once an extension of his soul, now felt heavier than the shame of survival. But here, as the first pour of steaming water met the powdered tea, the past softened at the edges. The sharp, ceremonial hiss of the whisk in the bowl was the only sound clean, deliberate like the draw of a katana in the moment before combat. But this time, it was not death he sought. The bitterness of the tea bloomed on his tongue, a taste both punishing and purifying, and for the first time in years, he did not recoil from it. The owner moved with the grace of cranes on a still lake, her every motion a lesson in presence. He mirrored her, matching breath to breath, his spine straightening as if the tea were liquid discipline, pouring resolve back into his bones. Light slanted through the shoji screens, painting the room in transient gold, and he thought of autumn leaves falling in the courtyard of his old lord's estate, how he had once raked them with care, believing the order of things would last forever. Now the cycles of the earth were all that remained certain. Steam curled lazily from the bowl, vanishing like the smoke of funeral pyres, and yet he drank. Her smile deepened, not in pity, but in recognition. He had come to her threshold a blade without a sheath. But here, in the ritual, in the quiet reverence of preparing, serving, receiving, he had found something akin to surrender, not the kind that dishonored a warrior, but the kind that honored the man beneath the armor. The tea bowl was no longer empty, not in his hands, not today. And when he exhaled, the ghosts exhaled with him. The Ronin knelt upon the tatami, the clean scent of woven straw and the faintest hint of cedar filling his nostrils as the breeze rustled through the open shoji screens. His hands, calloused from years of gripping a sword, trembled slightly as he lifted the empty tea bowl, cracked, yet carefully preserved, feeling the smooth curve of its rim beneath his fingers, a relic of a life long gone. The air was thick with the fragrance of fresh matcha, bitter and green, stirring memories of grand halls where tea ceremonies were once performed under the watchful eyes of his lord. The rustle of silk robes and the murmured cadence of poetry now just echoes in his mind. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of wooden geta on cobbled streets reminded him of the world moving on without him. Yet here, in this quiet space, time seemed to slow, stretching like the long shadows of dusk. He drew a deep breath, the sound barely audible over the soft hiss of boiling water. And as he exhaled, he felt the weight of his sword at his side, its presence, a constant reminder of duty abandoned, of battles fought and lost, of a clan scattered like autumn leaves. But in this moment, there was only the bowl, the tea, the precise angle of his bow as he lowered his head, his forehead nearly touching the floor. The movement was deliberate, reverent, a gesture of gratitude not just to the host, but to the gods, to the ancestors, to the fragile, enduring threads of tradition that still bound him to something greater than himself. The light shifted as a cloud passed over the sun, casting the room into a softer gloom. And for the first time in years, he felt not the gnawing ache of purposelessness, but a fleeting, fragile peace like the first sip of tea after a long winter, bitter yet sustaining. His eyes, when he raised them, were clear, no longer haunted by the spectral faces of the fallen, but instead reflecting the quiet certainty of a man who had, if only for a moment, remembered who he was. The bowl, once empty, now held something intangible. Not just tea, but a silent promise, a whispered hope that honor was not lost but merely waiting to be rediscovered, steeped in patience, like leaves in hot water. The Ronin sat back, his spine straight, his breath even. And in the stillness, he heard the distant cry of a crane, a sound that carried across rivers and mountains, bridging past and present, the warrior and the wanderer, the man and the memory. The Ronin stepped back into the night, the weight of his empty tea bowl now cradled in his palms, no longer hollow, but brimming with the quiet certainty of steam rising from freshly whisked matcha. The scent of rain-dampened cobblestones mingled with the faint, woody aroma of tatami drifting from the teahouse behind him, a memory of the ceremony still clinging to his skin like incense. His fingers traced the bowl's rim, smooth as a river stone, and for the first time in years, he did not flinch from the ghosts murmuring at the edges of his mind. The clash of steel, the choked cries of his fallen brothers, the searing shame of surviving where they had not. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the distant rustle of wind through pine needles, a sound that once, long ago, had lulled him to sleep in his clan's encampment. Wrapped in the certainty of duty, now it whispered of something softer, something older. His breath steadied, matching the rhythm of his footsteps as they clicked against the stones, the guitar's wooden soles marking time like a heartbeat. He paused, feeling the shift in the air, the tension between the stillness of the tea room and the vast, unmapped road ahead. The katana at his hip seemed lighter now, no longer an anchor to the past, but a tool balanced in his hand, its edge sharp as the present moment. Above him, the moon slipped from behind the clouds, casting the path in silver, and he smiled faintly. The bowl, once a symbol of loss, now held the quiet weight of a promise, to carry honor not as a burden, but as a choice, steeped again and again like leaves in hot water. The wind stirred his frayed sleeves, and he walked on, the shadows of the past settling into their proper place behind him, but not forgotten. The road stretched onward, but his steps were sure. For the first time since the fall, he was neither samurai nor Ronin, but simply a man, whole unto himself. The night embraced him, and he let it.